If you want the blunt version, here it is. The biggest thing Nicki Minaj and Cardi B have in common right now is not rap royalty, not Brooklyn grit, not fanbase warfare, and not even the fact that every conversation in female rap somehow loops back to them. It is distraction, not the cute kind, not the harmless kind. I'm talking about the kind of distraction that starts as gossip, mutates into identity, and then quietly swallows the actual art. And that is why this conversation matters more than another random stan war. Because when the two most magnetic women in the space keep becoming larger than the music for reasons that have nothing to do with the music, the audience starts consuming spectacle instead of songs. The headlines get louder. The records get smaller. The fan bases get meaner. And before anybody notices what changed, the entire genre starts feeling like one endless group chat argument with a beat playing faintly in the background. That is the uncomfortable thread tying Nicki Minaj and Cardi B together in this era. Both of them still have the name recognition. Both of them still have the instant click power. Both of them still have audiences who will stop scrolling the second their names appear in a title. Nicki Minaj can still dominate a conversation off a post, a clip, or a controversy spike. Cardi B can still bend the internet around a live, a rant, a red carpet moment, or a single quote. So this is not a eulogy for their relevance. It is the opposite. It is an autopsy of why two women with that much gravitational pull can still leave people feeling oddly unsatisfied. Because people are not starving for their celebrity. People are starving for the version of Nicki Minaj and Cardi B that makes the culture feel musically alive instead of emotionally exhausted. And if you've been paying attention to the broader landscape, you can feel the weird tension sitting over female rap right now. There are names. There are moments. There are chart wins, viral clips, fashion looks, live show talking points, and a new controversy every other sunrise. But a lot of the conversation still feels fragmented, unstable, almost overcaffeinated. One week the timeline is pretending a new star has finally taken over, and the next week everybody runs right back to Nicki Minaj or Cardi B because nobody else can hold public attention with the same force for the same length of time. That alone tells you the power structure has not really changed. It has just become noisier. The throne keeps being declared vacant, but the room still turns whenever Nicki Minaj speaks and whenever Cardi B moves. That is why this topic keeps landing with such a specific kind of frustration. It is not only that Nicki Minaj and Cardi B are constantly in the middle of conversation. It is that both of them keep finding themselves entangled in conversations that seem built to drain momentum instead of focus it. One gets pulled into politics, backlash cycles, long-running fan and media tensions, and the perception that every public choice now comes with extra baggage. The other gets pulled into romance discourse, live back and forths, internet reaction spirals, and the recurring feeling that every promising moment is one unnecessary detour away from becoming another mess. And when you zoom out, the pattern is hard to ignore. The names are different. The details are different. But the architecture is strangely similar. Let's start with Nicki Minaj, because with Nicki Minaj the contradiction is especially dramatic. Nicki Minaj spent years building a reputation that was bigger than any one album cycle. She was not just another successful rapper. Nicki Minaj was, for a long time, the gravitational center of a whole era. Her versatility gave her pop reach. Her technical ability gave her credibility. Her theatrical instincts made even people who did not like her music understand why she mattered. Nicki Minaj knew how to be sharp, animated, funny, arrogant, theatrical, vicious, melodic, and commercially fluent without looking like she was asking permission. That combination does not come around often. It made Nicki Minaj feel less like a participant in the machine and more like a force the machine had to reorganize around. And because Nicki Minaj occupied that tier for so long, every decline in trust feels louder than it would for almost anybody else. That is the price of building legend status in public. The higher the pedestal, the harsher the camera angle when the audience starts noticing the cracks. It is not enough for Nicki Minaj to simply remain famous. People keep measuring Nicki Minaj against the maximum version of Nicki Minaj. They remember the bars. They remember the dominance. They remember when her presence felt like an event instead of a debate. So when the public conversation turns away from the work and toward backlash, political alignment, endless social media combat, or stories that make people wonder whether the instincts are still calibrated, It does not feel like regular celebrity turbulence. It feels like somebody with elite tools is repeatedly choosing chaos over control. That is where the current frustration around Nicki Minaj becomes more layered than simple dislike. Some of the backlash is ideological. Some of it is image-based. Some of it comes from people who were already waiting to turn on her. But some of it is also coming from people who once defended Nicki Minaj reflexively and now sound tired. That fatigue matters. Fatigue is more dangerous than hate, because hate still requires energy. Fatigue means the audience no longer wants to fight for you the same way. And when a public figure with a fan base as broad and emotionally invested as Nicki Minaj keeps stepping into polarizing terrain, especially terrain that clashes with the values many supporters associate with her, that fatigue starts spreading faster than any one scandal. Now, to be fair, no major artist survives this long without becoming a symbol people project onto. Nicki Minaj is not only dealing with her own choices. Nicki Minaj is also dealing with what she represents to different groups at once. To some, Nicki Minaj is legacy. To some, Nicki Minaj is the blueprint. To some, Nicki Minaj is contradiction embodied. To some, Nicki Minaj is a cautionary tale about what happens when immense talent gets trapped in an increasingly combative public shell. And when all of those readings are competing at the same time, every appearance, every endorsement, every statement, every silence becomes overread. But here's the problem. When the room is that tense, strategic clarity matters more, not less. A legend cannot afford to look impulsive when the audience is already questioning the map. The saddest part is that the frustration around Nicki Minaj would be easier to dismiss if the talent were gone. Then at least the story would be simple. But the talent is not the issue. That is exactly what makes this so aggravating for people who once admired her or still do in pieces. The core asset remains obvious. Nicki Minaj still has the cadence memory, the personality imprint, the ability to command attention without trying to sound like anybody younger, trendier, or more algorithm-friendly. So when the public sees Nicki Minaj attached to backlash loops that feel avoidable, the reaction is not just criticism. It becomes a kind of disbelief. Like, how can somebody who already won so much still keep walking into traps that diminish the scale of her own gift? And this is where the echo chamber issue starts looming over everything. The internet makes every superstar more reactive, but it can also make every superstar more insulated. A big artist can mistake engagement for validation. A fan army can become so conditioned to counterpunching that nobody inside the perimeter is willing to say, "This is not helping." If you are powerful enough, you can build an environment where every move is defended faster than it is evaluated. That can feel protective in the short term. In the long term, it is poison. Because eventually the person at the center starts living in a hall of mirrors where conflict itself begins to resemble proof of importance. And once that happens, course correction gets harder. Not because the artist is incapable of it, but because the entire ecosystem around the artist has learned to reward escalation. That is part of why the public mood around Nicki Minaj feels so unstable right now. It is not just, did she say this, endorse that, or get dragged for the other thing. It is the cumulative sense that Nicki Minaj keeps entering situations where the temperature becomes the story. The fallout becomes the story. The fan defense becomes the story. The outrage becomes the story. Then the actual music is forced to compete with whatever emotional firestorm is already burning in the room. That is a terrible trade for an artist whose strongest argument has always been the art itself. The best version of Nicki Minaj does not need chaos to look important. The best version of Nicki Minaj makes chaos look small. And yet, if I'm being honest, this is also the point where pure mockery starts feeling too easy. Because when a public figure becomes this reactive, this embattled, this chronically engulfed by collision, there is often something deeper than simple messiness under the hood. Pressure changes people. Isolation changes people. The longer celebrity lasts, the more it can turn self-protection into identity. A person who spent years having to defend their position can become so attached to combat that they lose the ability to distinguish a genuine threat from a self-created spiral. That does not excuse bad choices. It does explain why patterns repeat, even when the consequences are obvious to everybody else watching. So with Nicki Minaj, the real tragedy is not that the internet says mean things. The real tragedy is that the public conversation has drifted so far from awe and so deep into exhaustion. Think about how many artists would kill for Nicki Minaj's catalog footprint, name recognition, influence, and sheer cultural imprint. Now think about how frequently the discussion around Nicki Minaj is no longer led by the work, but by backlash and the emotional debris orbiting the work. That is not a talent problem. That is a focus problem. It is a strategy problem. It is a trust problem. And most of all, it is a narrative problem, because the story people now expect from Nicki Minaj often has more to do with turbulence than triumph. But if Nicki Minaj is one side of this coin, Cardi B is the other. And with Cardi B, the contradiction wears a different outfit. Cardi B's public magnetism has always come from immediacy. Where Nicki Minaj often feels architected, Cardi B feels combustible. Where Nicki Minaj can project distance and performance polish, Cardi B's strongest mode is emotional proximity. People feel like they are getting the uncensored version in real time, even when the line between spontaneous and strategic is blurrier than it looks. That is a real superpower. You cannot fake Cardi B's ability to make millions of people feel like they are eavesdropping on a reaction instead of consuming a packaged statement. It is the reason Cardi B can turn a clip, a laugh, a rant, or a rant about a rant into a full-blown event. And commercially, that kind of immediacy has always been one of Cardi B's greatest weapons. Because people do not just watch Cardi B. They anticipate Cardi B. They quote Cardi B. They build discourse around Cardi B before the full story even lands. That kind of presence is rare. It is also dangerous when not handled carefully, because the same charisma that makes people lean in can also lure a star into narrating every detour in real time. Suddenly the side plot is not a side plot anymore. It becomes the main spectacle. And when that keeps happening, the artist risks teaching the audience to care more about the turbulence than the trajectory. That is the issue hanging over Cardi B right now. Not relevance, not charisma, not hit-making potential. Nobody's saying doubts that Cardi B can still command attention or ignite a release cycle. The issue is that too much of the public conversation around Cardi B keeps getting dragged toward relationship mess, online defense mode, or public tangles that feel dramatically smaller than her actual career ceiling. Whether it is viral footage, breakup speculation, reconciliation chatter, a tense exchange caught outside somewhere, or Cardi B jumping online to swat at narratives that may not deserve that much oxygen. The same pattern keeps resurfacing. Momentum appears, then distraction rushes in to sit in the front seat. And yes, some of this is unfair. Public women, especially highly visible Black women in entertainment, get analyzed through a cruel microscope. Their emotions are monetized. Their love lives are dissected. Their boundaries are ignored. Their mistakes are inflated into personality diagnoses. So I am not pretending Cardi B exists in a neutral media climate. She absolutely does not. But even after acknowledging all of that, the harder truth remains. Cardi B sometimes seems irresistibly drawn towards side quests that dilute her own momentum. Not because she lacks ambition, not because she lacks awareness, but because immediacy can trick powerful people into thinking every accusation deserves a response, and every narrative needs to be wrestled on camera. Look at how quickly the discourse can veer. Cardi B should be discussed in terms of star power, crossover instinct, meme literacy, hook memory, stage presence, and her unique ability to sound both larger than life and painfully accessible at the same time. Instead, the timeline gets consumed by arguments over who embarrassed whom, who defended whom, who was spotted with whom, who should have ignored whom, and whether Cardi B is once again spending emotional energy on a man or a situation that is nowhere near worthy of the amount of public bandwidth it is stealing. Even when Cardi B is right on the facts in a given moment, the optics can still be costly, because sometimes winning the argument loses the atmosphere. That is what makes the recent wave of Cardi B discourse so frustrating to watch. There is a version of Cardi B's career that feels almost insultingly obvious. Release strategically. Keep the mystique tighter. Let the music do more of the heavy lifting. Stop loaning center stage to every public irritant. Preserve the unpredictability that serves the art, not the unpredictability that hijacks the art. Yet over and over, Cardi B appears willing to jump into emotional weather that leaves the audience talking about the weather instead of the work. And once that pattern hardens, it starts shaping how people forecast every next move. They stop waiting for the drop. They start waiting for the detour. That is why the recurring romance and reaction cycle matters so much. It is not only about one man, one rumor, one argument, or one headline. It is about pattern recognition. The public thinks it has learned something about Cardi B, that no matter how much promise is on the table, there is always a chance the conversation will be rerouted into chaos by somebody who has not earned that level of influence over the narrative. The tragic part is that this does not make Cardi B less compelling. In some ways, it makes Cardi B more watchable. But watchable and well-positioned are not the same thing. Spectacle drives clicks. Discipline builds eras. And this is where Cardi B and Nicki Minaj become disturbingly similar. On the surface, they are opposites. Different persona, different instincts, different fan culture, different public rhythm, different relationship to vulnerability. But both Nicki Minaj and Cardi B now seem vulnerable to the same larger trap, allowing non-musical conflict to become a primary lens through which the audience experiences their era. That does not erase their differences. It does expose the shared cost. When your audience starts bracing for drama more automatically than it braces for music, even your strengths begin arriving through a haze. That is the real issue in female rap right now, and honestly, in celebrity culture more broadly. The algorithmic environment rewards reaction speed, emotional volatility, and repeat conflict. The platforms want strong feelings. The blogs want fresh angles. The fan bases want victory. The detractors want collapse. The gossip economy wants daily feed. Under those conditions, someone like Nicki Minaj can mistake perpetual conflict for perpetual relevance, and someone like Cardi B can mistake direct engagement for control of the story. But the machine is not loyal to either outcome. It will inflate the spectacle and then act shocked when the spectacle starts overshadowing the substance. The irony is brutal. Nicki Minaj and Cardi B are the exact kind of stars who should be too big for side plot captivity. Nicki Minaj should feel like an institution. Cardi B should feel like a live wire with impeccable timing. Instead, both of them keep getting reduced, in very different ways, by the smallness of the discourse that sticks to them. Nicki Minaj gets pulled downward by the perception of needless combat and alignment choices that alienate chunks of her own symbolic base. Cardi B gets pulled sideways by emotional overexposure, relationship noise, and the public habit of turning every personal complication into a front-page event. Different roads, same erosion. And before somebody tries to flatten this in a Stan language, let me be clear. Saying this is not the same as crowning one and burying the other. It is not about deciding whether Nicki Minaj is more self-sabotaging than Cardi B or whether Cardi B is more sympathetic than Nicki Minaj. That is lazy. The more interesting point is that both women reveal two different failure modes of superstardom in the social media era. Nicki Minaj shows what happens when empire energy mutates into siege energy. Cardi B shows what happens when relatability becomes so live and porous that the borders around the career get blurry. One can become trapped by defensiveness. The other can become trapped by immediacy. Both traps are costly, and the audience feels that cost more than people admit. Because even fans who swear they love the mess are also mourning something every time the mess takes over. They are mourning possibility. They are mourning what it would feel like if an era arrived clean, sharp, musically undeniable, and narratively centered. They are mourning the version of this landscape where Nicki Minaj headlines a conversation because a verse detonated, not because backlash ricocheted. They are mourning the version where Cardi B owns the week because a record hit so hard it made all the side chatter irrelevant. That is what sits underneath so much of the irritation online. People are not only judging behavior, they are grieving squandered momentum in real time. And if you want proof, just look at how audiences talk when either woman appears to be approaching a lock-in phase. The mood shifts immediately. People get excited when Nicki Minaj sounds dialed in. People get excited when Cardi B looks focused. Why? Because everybody understands, even if they will not say it cleanly, that female rap becomes more alive when Nicki Minaj and Cardi B are acting like apex artists instead of permanent defendants in the court of internet distraction. The room changes when heavyweights carry themselves like heavyweights. Even their rivals benefit from a healthier ecosystem, because a focused top tier raises the temperature for everybody. So what would it actually look like for Nicki Minaj to break this cycle? First, the comeback would not begin with louder defense. It would begin with subtraction. Less public friction, less identity warfare, less impulsive oxygen handed to fights that make the brand feel brittle. Nicki Minaj does not need more proof that people are watching. Nicki Minaj needs more moments that remind people why they watched in the first place. That means discipline in what gets acknowledged. It means moving with enough precision that detractors are forced to critique the work instead of freeloading off the fallout. It means letting the mystique breathe again. Most of all, it means understanding that legendary status is not maintained by winning every skirmish. Legendary status is maintained by making the skirmishes look too small for your full attention. And crucially, if Nicki Minaj wants to reset public emotion, the reset cannot feel like damage control theater. People are too pattern literate now. They can smell artificial humility. They can smell image laundering disguised as growth. The only thing that really works at that level is coherence. The choices have to start making sense together. The tone has to feel intentional. The focus has to look expensive. If the output is sharp and the surrounding noise is limited, even skeptical people start recalibrating. Not overnight, but steadily. Greatness does not erase memory, yet it can force memory into competition with what is happening now. Nicki Minaj still has enough talent to create that kind of collision if the strategy stops sabotaging the scale. Now let's talk about Cardi B, because Cardi B's reset would require a different kind of discipline. Cardi B's brand is not built on distance. It is built on candor, personality, comic timing, high emotion, and the feeling that she is not reading from a polished teleprompter inside her own soul. So the answer for Cardi B is not to become cold. The answer is to become selective. Cardi B has to decide which version of transparency serves the career and which version accidentally rents out the career to every headline chaser and relationship subplot that wanders by. The world does not need a running commentary every time a narrative gets ugly. Sometimes the most powerful move is to refuse the bait and let the work create the weather. Because when Cardi B is truly locked in, the machine struggles to contain her. She can make a clip feel like culture. She can make a line feel like slang before lunch. She can make a release feel communal. She can be funny without sounding unserious and fierce without losing casualness. Those are elite gifts. But elite gifts need narrative protection. If Cardi B keeps allowing the room to drag her into every emotional alleyway, then even genuine wins start arriving with an asterisk of fatigue. People begin saying things like, yes, but let's see how long this lasts before the next mess. That sentence alone should be offensive to someone with Cardi B's level of raw star power. And this is why the male factor in so much public Cardi B discourse feels especially irritating to people. Not because women should never speak about relationships. Not because personal life has to be hidden to be respectable, but because the imbalance is so obvious. Cardi B is the megastar. Cardi B is the center of gravity. Cardi B is the reason the public is paying attention. Yet time and time again, the conversation gets reorganized around whether some man, some rumor, some clip, some defense, some public tussle, or some half-baked internet courtroom should be allowed to sit in her passenger seat. Why should that be the ratio? Why should Cardi B keep making room for narratives that shrink the frame around her own achievement? That question lands even harder when you remember what both women represent in the market. Whether people admit it or not, Nicki Minaj and Cardi B remain two of the most efficient attention engines in rap. They can still anchor discourse at scale. They can still pull in casual viewers, obsessive fans, detractors, and curiosity clickers all at once. They still mean something beyond one release. And because they still mean that much, every wasted cycle becomes more visible. A middling artist can afford narrative clutter because the stakes are smaller. Nicki Minaj and Cardi B cannot. When giants drift, the whole landscape notices. There is also a broader emotional reason people respond so strongly to this comparison. Nicki Minaj and Cardi B trigger opposite identification patterns. Some people see Nicki Minaj as ambition pushed to mythic scale, then warped by siege mentality. Some people see Cardi B as authenticity turned into a kingdom, then destabilized by overaccess and relational chaos. Those are different fantasies and different fears, but both are intimate enough that audiences project lessons onto them. People are not just watching celebrities. They are watching symbolic case studies. What happens when power hardens? What happens when openness becomes overexposure? What happens when talent is no longer the only thing steering the story? And that symbolic dimension is exactly why neither woman can keep pretending distraction is harmless fuel. There is a lie celebrity culture tells all the time. as long as people are talking, nothing is truly lost. That is false. Plenty gets lost. Trust gets lost. Narrative clarity gets lost. Anticipation gets replaced by dread. Respect gets thinned out by repetition. The audience begins to feel overfed on fragments and underfed on meaning. You can be loudly visible and still become emotionally diluted. In some ways, that is more dangerous than a quiet flop, because dilution is harder to diagnose. It looks like relevance from far away. Up close, it feels like drift. So if there is one brutal sentence that captures what Nicki Minaj and Cardi B have in common right now, it is this: both are too powerful to look this narratively vulnerable. That is the indictment. Not that they are washed. Not that they are unloved. Not that they cannot rebound. The indictment is that women with this much influence should not feel so repeatedly hijacked by noise. Nicki Minaj should not keep ending up in cycles where the backlash competes with the bars. Cardi B should not keep ending up in cycles where personal chaos competes with the career momentum. The more that happens, the more the audience starts experiencing both women through interference instead of impact. And for the genre, that matters. Because when the two most durable conversation magnets in female rap are consistently associated with distraction, the entire field starts feeling unstable. Newer artists are measured against a moving mess instead of a clear standard. Fans get trained to prioritize conflict over craft. Media ecosystems become even lazier because personality blow-ups generate faster traffic than close listening. Then everybody wonders why the scene feels volatile, why every week has a new emergency, why no victory seems to stay centered long enough to become legacy. Maybe part of the answer is that the loudest rooms keep rewarding the wrong material. This is also where the public should be honest about its own role. Viewers say they want music first, but they reward spectacle with a manic consistency. They claim to hate chaos, then keep feeding it with comments, reaction videos, reposts, and moral theater. Every ecosystem teaches its stars what will travel. If the most reliable attention comes from conflict, stars eventually learn to live near conflict. That does not remove personal responsibility from Nicki Minaj or Cardi B. It does explain why pattern correction is so hard. They are not just battling themselves. They are battling a market that monetizes their least disciplined impulses almost instantly. Still, responsibility lands hardest on the people with the most power. And that is why this conversation keeps circling back to them. Not because there are no other names in female rap, but because Nicki Minaj and Cardi B still carry outsized symbolic weight. If Nicki Minaj gets focused, the culture feels it. If Cardi B gets focused, the culture feels it. If either one delivers a truly locked-in era, the noise reorganizes around the work whether the blogs like it or not. But if both keep drifting into self-defeating loops, the culture feels that too. It starts to internalize exhaustion as normal. It starts expecting every promising chapter to arrive pre-contaminated by distraction. And maybe that is the bleakest part of all. Distraction is not just stealing time. It is stealing mythology. Great artists need mythology that amplifies the work, not mythology that crowds it out. Nicki Minaj should be moving like somebody who understands that every new era either refines the legend or muddies it. Cardi B should be moving like somebody who knows every unnecessary detour taxes the freshness that made the audience fall in love in the first place. These are not small artists playing for polite applause. These are giants. Giants do not get the luxury of repeated mess without a narrative bill eventually coming due. So no, the common thread between Nicki Minaj and Cardi B is not simply that they are both iconic women from the same borough energy, both battle-tested, both impossible to ignore, or both permanently attached to the center of female rap discourse. The deeper common thread is that both have allowed distraction to become too intimate with their brand. Nicki Minaj's distraction often arrives dressed as combat, backlash, and ideological fracture. Cardi B's distraction often arrives dressed as intimacy, reaction, and emotional side quests. But either way, the result is the same. The art has to fight its way through static that should never have been this powerful. And if they do not interrupt that pattern soon, the consequences will not necessarily show up as an instant collapse. It will show up as erosion. Slower awe, thinner trust, less benefit of the doubt, more spectators than believers, more headlines than legacy moments, more people talking about what could have been centered than what actually was. That is how major stars start feeling weirdly smaller without ever becoming obscure. Not because the talent vanished, but because the narrative got crowded with too many avoidable detours and too little sustained precision. But here is the good news, and it is real good news. Neither Nicki Minaj nor Cardi B is beyond a reframe. Both still have enough power to reset the room if they truly choose to. Nicki Minaj can still stun people by sounding elite enough that the surrounding friction suddenly feels unserious. Cardi B can still dominate a cycle by releasing work so sticky, so undeniable, and so strategically protected that the side chatter finally looks beneath her. That possibility is exactly why people remain this passionate. Nobody argues this hard about artists they have stopped believing in. The disappointment is loud because the ceiling is still visible. So maybe that is the final challenge sitting in front of both women. Not can they trend. Not can they trigger stand warfare. Not can they produce another viral quote or another week of addictive chaos. We already know they can do all of that. The real challenge is whether Nicki Minaj and Cardi B can still become bigger than the distractions that currently define too much of their public atmosphere. Can Nicki Minaj replace exhaustion with authority again? Can Cardi B replace detour energy with direction? Can either one stop giving trivial storms the power to sit in the same frame as world-class potential? Because if one of them does it first, watch how quickly the whole conversation changes. Watch how many critics suddenly remember the talent they were burying under discourse. Watch how many fans rediscover what focus feels like. Watch how fast the genre itself seems to breathe better. That is how central they still are. That is how unfinished this story remains. And that is exactly why the common thread between Nicki Minaj and Cardi B should make their fan bases uncomfortable. Two giants should not be this easy to derail. Two giants should not keep making noise compete with greatness. Two giants should not keep feeding the static that keeps their own crowns from looking as heavy as they actually are. There is one more layer that cannot be ignored, and it may be the layer that decides everything from this point forward: memory. Audiences remember how artists made them feel at their peak, but they also remember how long they were asked to tolerate confusion on the way down. Nicki Minaj is battling memory from both directions. People remember the domination, the originality, the fearlessness, the full command version of Nicki Minaj that could enter a record and rearrange the oxygen in it. But people also remember the fatigue of repeated conflict, the emotional drag of feeling like every conversation is eventually going to circle back to a war room instead of a wow moment. Cardi B is battling memory from both directions too. People remember the charisma, the quotability, the flashes of command, the way Cardi B can turn pop culture into something that feels alive and unscripted. But people also remember how often momentum gets interrupted by emotional spillover, how often a clean lane gets crowded by noise that feels too small for somebody with that much reach. And once memory hardens, it starts working like gravity. Every new move is judged against what came before. That is why the next era for both women cannot merely be good. It has to be clarifying. It has to correct the emotional memory of the last stretch, not just add content to it. That is the fork in the road. Nicki Minaj can either keep letting the public read every new move through the lens of siege, backlash, and friction, or Nicki Minaj can force a new reading by making the work and the discipline impossible to deny. Cardi B can either keep allowing outside turbulence to rent premium space inside her narrative, or Cardi B can finally tighten the frame and remind everybody that her gift is too rare to keep getting crowded by side plots. One path keeps the discourse hot and the legacy blurry. The other path may feel quieter at first, but it rebuilds weight, awe, and durability. And if neither woman chooses it, then the next generation will inherit a culture where the biggest stars taught everybody that distraction is just part of the crown. That would be a loss for the artists, a loss for the audience, and a loss for the genre itself. So now the question is simple, and I need a real answer, not a polite one. Which pattern is more dangerous in the long run? Nicki Minaj living too close to backlash and combat, or Cardi B living too close to emotional detours and public side quests? And which one do you honestly believe can lock back in faster when it is time to choose music over mess? Drop that below, because this conversation is bigger than fan loyalty at this point. It is about focus, legacy, and whether